Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Seth Early, and today we're going to be talking about unlocking the power of generative AI, the role of knowledge management. This is a very exciting topic, and I know everybody is very enthusiastic about generative AI and ChatGPT, but there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of hype, as usual whenever we have any inflection point or any major change in evolution and technology. That's what happens, right? There's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. Everybody's jumping on board. And we want to talk about how to do this with enterprise content, enterprise knowledge. And I'm here with my colleague. My name is Seth Early. I'm founder and CEO of Early Information Science. You can see I have a book called The AI-Powered Enterprise. And I'll tell you, when ChatGPT first came out, I had a little bit of an existential crisis, right? I was thinking, oh my God, is this still appropriate? Is my business doomed? And the more research I did, the more I found that everything that I wrote in that book is still applicable today. Everything that we wrote about in terms of componentization of knowledge, building question answering systems, enriching content with metadata, that all is critical. And so getting the knowledge management piece of this right and being able to integrate this with generative AI and large language models is really the way this is moving forward. And I'm here with Dan Turchin, who's my colleague, good colleague and friend from PeopleRain. I'll let Dan, why don't you give a quick thumbnail of your background?
You bet. Seth, first and foremost, a news flash. I've seen the future, and the humans win. So you know what, Seth, you and I are on the right side of innovation here. And I hope that if there's nothing else that we communicate with the audience today, it's be optimistic. Now's a great time to be a leader. Now's a great time to think about what's the essence of humanity and help transform a bunch of lives in the process, because a lot of people are asking these questions, these kind of existential questions about what it means to be a human when well, let's say your bot might be a colleague.
Yeah, it is astounding. And again, in the first chapter of my book, I write about a vision for the future where we're interacting with conversational agents just very fluently. And that is what's happening now. We're still a ways away from making that work in the way that I envisioned it, but it's happening. We are at an inflection point in human history, and this is what's so tremendously exciting. So I totally agree with you, Dan. Did you want to add a little bit more about who you are and just a little of your background?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm the CEO of PeopleRain. It's the AI platform that automates the delivery of IT and HR employee service. We're on a mission to positively impact work life for the next 1 billion employees. Typical PeopleRain customers benefit from reducing their ticket volumes by 65% or more. Usually the cost per ticket will go down at least 90%. And all the while, they're improving the self-service experience. They're improving self-service adoption by 40% or more. This is all because, like with partners like Seth and the team at Early Information Science, we help organizations improve their content hygiene. If you're interested in not just the future of AI or the future of large language models, but in really delivering a better experience for your employees, let's talk. And I'll also tease at the end, stick around to the end, and we're going to share a link to a executive summary of research that we performed at PeopleRain recently. We interviewed over 1,300 employees as well as IT and HR experts about the state of the employee experience. And the results are just fascinating. And just for attending today, we'll give you for free the executive summary of the report. Seth knows, because he was a great guest on my podcast. I also host a podcast called AI and the Future of Work. We've interviewed over 190 thought leaders, experts, entrepreneurs who are really out defining the future of work. All of those episodes are available for free wherever you get your podcasts. If you're as passionate as Seth and I are about these kinds of topics, about the future of work, about making better humans, about using technology to unleash human potential, then please, I'd encourage you, continue the dialogue and go to wherever you get your podcast as a starting point and listen to some episodes, including the great one with Seth. Seth, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Absolutely. And I've been on Dan's, as he mentioned, and Dan's been on our podcast. So Early AI, don't forget that. I should have had that up here in the notes. We're recording today, so if you don't have time to attend the whole thing, or you have colleagues that you want to share this with, you'll be able to get that. We're going to shoot for 45 minutes, and we're going to we don't want to take too much of your day. We'll give you a little bit of your time back if you plan in an hour, and we'll try to get some questions in discussion. So be sure to enter those into the chat. We have a couple of polls today, so it's great if you can participate in those and give us a sense of where you are. So here's our agenda. Why now? What's happening now? We are at an inflection point in human history, and this is what's so exciting. The impact of generative AI. Generative AI is a game changer, right? We all know that. We'll just talk a little bit about the Morgan Stanley case study, which is on OpenAI site, because there's some interesting revelations there, right? There's some interesting situations where they have to think about their particular knowledge, challenges around generative AI, challenges, and of course, the fixes around large language models. Of course, the big challenge is, what's the accuracy of your responses? Is it going to hallucinate? How does it know your answers to your, your questions and your IP? And how do you protect that, right? Because you can't just upload it to the tool. You can't just share all of that. We'll talk about that. So we'll talk about training the system with your knowledge. AI in the employee experience. We'll talk about generalized versus specialized language models and what that means to the organization, and the fact that you do need to think about your terminology, because these systems don't necessarily understand your terminology, especially if it's a highly specified or detailed area or technical area or unique niche area. We'll talk about create once, publish everywhere. This is master data for knowledge. And this is something that a very large technology firm has deployed. They power everything from all of their external communications, channel partners, field service, embedded content within their tools and their products, and all of their chat bots, right? And this create once, publish everywhere is so critical. And that is a lot of what I talk about in the book. It's really building those content models that allow you to chunk the content in a meaningful way. People talk about that in the technology space. They say, well, you have to, what happened here? I don't know what just happened. Okay. Why is it doing that? I do not know. Do you see the words down at the bottom here, Dan, or no? Is that just me? I don't know why that happened. Let me see if I can't get out of this and stop it. Sorry, guys. Let me go back and share again. Slide. Okay. We'll fix this in post. Try again. Don't know what I did, but anyway, you can see my slide. Hopefully, should be loading, and you should see it now. Anyway, just a little bit about early information science. We've been around for over 25 years. We work with Fortune 1000 companies, and it's really about making information more usable, more findable, more valuable, and being able to do that across lots of different contexts. Knowledge is a very important piece of that, obviously. I know you've stolen a little bit of your thunder here, but just want to give another moment about PeopleRain.
Yeah, when I talk about using AI to improve the employee experience, it can sound a little bit academic. There's nothing academic at all about what we do. In fact, it's very pragmatic. There are 4 AI applications built on top of a uniform, what we call an AI system of intelligence. There's a virtual agent that uses conversational AI to diagnose and resolve most common issues for employees. If the virtual agent, for whatever reason, isn't sufficient, there are 2 applications built on the PeopleRain platform that support the live agent. So just imagine if every novice in the call center all of a sudden was as much of an expert as the most seasoned agent. That's what PeopleRain does. It provides an application called Classify that finds the best agent, and then it provides an application called Recommend that uses AI and machine learning to coach the live agent through the process of resolving the employee's issue the right way the first time. And then at the back end of the life cycle of an employee service request, there's an application called Insights, which is a predictive analytics dashboard that surfaces trends. And one important trend that we'll be talking about that's very germane to this conversation is knowledge gaps. So using AI, PeopleRain is able to figure out what are the gaps in your knowledge so that you can provide better input, better data to train models that might ultimately surface insights via conversational AI in something like an LLM. So 4 applications that automate the life cycle of an employee service request. And we talk about the A in AI really should stand for augmented. There's nothing artificial about it. And if you're interested in a better employee experience, then take PeopleRain for a test drive and see what the future of augmented intelligence looks like.
That's great. Thank you. By the way, there's a quick question that we have. How can we make sure we trust the data that comes out of these systems, particularly those of us who need to have data source of truth when we hear about hallucinations? That is exactly what we're talking about today. So we're going to get to that. Thank you for that question. So let's continue on. What I want to start with is just give me a sense of where you are in your organization. Are you considering using ChatGPT for your organization? And again, is it, under initial investigation, small scale POCs? Are you deploying it? I see some people are deploying it for external customer support. That's incredible. And that means that you're far ahead of the curve, especially if you're using this to manage your own knowledge. I see some people are deploying for internal employee support, internally for customer support, right? So if you either have it facing the customer itself, or you have it facing an employee who's facing the customer, right? Which is kind of my preferred way to do things, because you can check the content, you can verify it, you can validate it, you can make sure you're not hallucinating. So take another minute or two and just go ahead and fill this out. But it looks like a lot of you are really mostly in the initial investigation. I see a little bit more popcorn is popping. People are still putting in some answers. So I'll wait another moment. But again, it looks like the majority are in the initial investigation. Let me go ahead and share those results. It looks like you're mostly in the initial investigation, which makes sense because we're so early in the marketplace. I see some small scale POCs. And then again, I love the fact that there's some folks that are doing this. And if you have none of the above, maybe it doesn't apply, but you can also share in the chat. Dan, any color commentary on this?
Very helpful. We'll adapt our comments based on the fact that 60% are just in the initial scoping phase.
Great. Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, let's keep going here. So let me close out of that. So Dan, why don't I let you talk a little bit about why now?
Yes, Seth, work is going to change in the next decade. I'd say more than it has possibly in the previous 200 years, going all the way back to, let's say, the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century. We are all faced with, heck, just since November, when ChatGPT launched, we're all faced with this kind of set of existential questions I mentioned up front. What does it actually mean to be a human when increasingly machines can do so many of the tasks that we thought were an innate part of the human experience? We have to ask ourselves, what is it that we love doing? What is it that we're passionate about? And I want everyone who's listening to foreshadow a time, maybe in the next 2-3 years, when thanks to automation and AI and machine learning, potentially LLMs, large language models, you can get a week's work done in 4 days. So the kind of mythical 4-day work week. But yes, that's interesting for a variety of reasons, but what are you going to do with that extra day per week? How can you be a better parent, a spouse, a better friend, pursue a hobby, a better employee? So we are right on the precipice of not just being inundated or having AI kind of ambient in the environment around us at work and as well as in our consumer lives, but we're going to have a choice to make about what it means to be able to have this productivity dividend, you and your colleagues and everyone that you interact with. And one way to perceive these cataclysmic changes that are happening at a cultural level is to be afraid of what might happen or scared about job elimination. But I'd argue that to be on the right side of innovation, I would encourage you to think about the positives. Now is a good time to think about reskilling or upskilling. If you're in a career that is easily automated, you know what? This is probably a good time to rethink that being the best career. Think about all of the amazing opportunities that these technologies are going to create. And Seth and I are going to talk about a lot of these opportunities, but according to the World Economic Forum, in the next 3 years, AI is likely to eliminate about 85 million jobs, but it's going to create a net new 97 million. So think about all the ways that we're going to need people to train the machine learning algorithms, and think about deploying AI responsibly and coaching organizations and anything that requires empathy or rational thinking. I'll go on the record and say that will always require humans, but anything that can be predicted is probably better left to machines. So just at the outset of this conversation, Seth, I'd encourage everyone listening to really think about how profound we are right, the state that we're at in history is right now, and really encourage you to think about one thing you could do as a leader, as a human, to take advantage of the fact that some of these trends are afoot.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you that there's going to be massive labor disruption, massive job disruption, but it's like any other revolution. In the Industrial Revolution did the same thing. People were afraid of that. There are people, the Queen Elizabeth saying, all my weavers are going to be out of work, right? So banning, looms, and the whole point here is that we can't stop this progress, but we have to adapt to it, and we have to understand what that's going to mean in terms of shifting things. And there's been this fear because everything has been automated over the last 100 years, 200 years. And again, it is the nature of the beast. Everything we do is to reduce that either physical load or cognitive load on a human and make things easier for them to do. So lots and lots of jobs have been displaced, and we don't know what's going to happen, right? When at the turn of the 20th century, we had steam shovels and they put ditch diggers out of work. Well, who wanted to dig ditches? And we got to build highways and skyscrapers and cities and all sorts of other things. And by the way, I'll turn this back over to you, Dan, but we do have another person saying the same thing. How do these things learn about my questions and answers? And that is really what we're going to dig into after we get past this. So
yeah, Joe and Jeff, thanks for those questions. We'll make sure we address them. So on a scale of, are LLMs, are we facing kind of an existential crisis, or what are some of the pragmatic implications? And then when are we going to address some of these topics? Quick survey course on some of the things for you as a leader to be thinking about. Now, I'll let you know, I teach a course that is basically this slide expanded into a half day of conversations and commentary. So we're not going to unpack this all in the next 2 minutes, but I did want to just give you some fodder or some ways to think about the changes that are underway. IP infringement. Who owns the IP generated by large language models? And commercialization. Right now, we get it for free, but you know what? It's free, kind of like ripping other people's musics on Napster in 1999 was free for about 3 months. Biased input. We all know that LLMs are perfectly designed to replicate human bias. We need to be really aware of that, and that's a topic we'll cover in a bit. Who is responsible for the content that AI generates? What does it mean to hold algorithms accountable for the weights and the decisions that they make? What do we expect, or what should we know about what inputs went into a decision an AI model made? We call that explainability. What are the geopolitics of AI? We recently saw about 2,500 leaders, including Elon Musk, pen an open letter saying, let's slow down the pace of innovation. Others said, well, the United States should remain a power when it comes to AI. It's an interesting discussion. Privacy and safety. I'm the father of 2 daughters. I want to know that when they're interacting with ChatGPT, let alone TikTok or other sources, I want to feel like they're in a safe place, and there's some issues there. Certainly, mental health, there can be ramifications. So as enterprises, we need to make sure that we put guardrails around what LLMs can and can't do. Class warfare, we don't want this to be another opportunity to exaggerate or amplify the differences between classes in society. And then furthest up and to the right on the existential scale, some of the questions I posed earlier. Are we rapidly approaching a point where there's a convergence of carbon-based and silicon-based life forms? I'll leave that out there as a thought experiment. But again, all of these topics are important, and hopefully we get a chance to meet after this session, and I'd love to explore them with you and your teams.
Great. So I just want to talk a little bit about Morgan Stanley, because Morgan Stanley's held up as a case study on the OpenAI website. And what they talked about was, again, using GPT-4, but their own knowledge, right? Because this comes back to eliminating the hallucination. So one of the things they say is they had a content library, hundreds of thousands of pages, investment strategies, market reports, insights, and so on. They had to be able to do a search and retrieval on this content, right? So again, it is, but we'll talk about how you can you can process the utterance, the question, the query, and you can process the results. But at the end of the day, this was a search or retrieval of very specific information. And there are ways to do this. we have to find answers to specific questions. And a lot of the tutorials that are out there that show developers building out some of these models where they say, oh, build your own ChatGPT bot or knowledge bot or retrieval bot or whatever it is. They talk about chunking content. That is critically important, breaking content up into components so that you can build question answering system, finding the specific answers to questions. So this is not as automagic as people think, especially when you start talking about your own knowledge sources. And again, what this is doing is it's also synthesizing. It's accessing, processing, and synthesizing content, but it's building that synthesis on the content that you have and putting guardrails around that. So when you think about generative AI, that creates content, right? That's what this means. It generates it. It's not simply retrieving the content. It's not repeating that content. It's creating content. And most organizations have to process their own content. So this is the critical thing here is, what are we doing to do this? And this is very technically feasible and very possible. So one of the things that we need to consider is that generalized large language models are generalized. They are concept and term relationships for the English language and for other languages, but it's really to understand how language fits together, what concepts are related to other concepts, what terminology, what phrasing, what sentences, what words should likely appear, but they don't necessarily understand your enterprise specific terms. So that's something that we need to make sure that we have a mechanism for building a lexicon and ontology of our enterprise specific terms, because that's not going to be in a generalized language model. We know that these things can be biased, right? So we need to understand how to detect the biased answers, right? There has to be some mechanisms to put guardrails around the bias. And part of this is the content, obviously, and part of this is the terminology. But large language models are built on, as Dan said, human interactions and human communications, and will have human bias. Lack of organization-specific knowledge. Again, this is the point here that we're making, is that we have to train on and access our enterprise content. We don't want to ingest our IP into these tools to train an LLM, right? We can't do that because Samsung did this by mistake. Employees were putting code in that was proprietary code and asking for improvements. But once you do that, you are now losing control of your IP. So we need to document the sources. We need to have those access mechanisms, and we need to be able to identify exactly where content came from and make sure that it's protected and not simply ingested. So you're really going to be using these large language models with a specific language model, maybe an industry specific, but your language model, your terminology, and then your content. And of course, we have problems with risks in regulated industries, especially if we are not positive that the content is accurate. And this is where we need to create audit trails, again, document those sources, create those audit trails, and be able to tag content in a way that you know where it comes from, right? Because you can incorporate that into the model. And of course, we need to filter out content that is unsuitable, that is inappropriate. There was an article the other day that I was reading about using large language models to conduct chemistry synthesis experiments, and they connected it with a lab, with a cloud lab, where it actually researched the synthesis steps, obtained the chemicals through this cloud lab, actually handled the materials and the liquids to put them into reaction chambers, set the temperatures, the agitation, all of these things, and were able to synthesize compounds. Now, they tried to get it to synthesize compounds that were illegal or illicit, drugs and chemical nerve agents and so on. And they declined it, but they were able to get around it in certain ways. So we have to be very careful about the content. And of course, without those specific reference sources, we need to be able to understand those results and understand the confidence in those results. And we need to know what those confidence thresholds are. Dan, did you want to add some color commentary?
Yeah, I want to make sure we answer Jeff and Joe's questions, which are good, about how to use my enterprise content in a way that's safe. So just taking into account all the points that Seth just made, here's the way to think about the appropriate architecture. So the LLM needs to be wrapped around a layer of governance, as well as a layer of auditability and resiliency. Those are the things that in an enterprise are required that when you and I as consumers are poking around in ChatGPT, we don't think about. one of the limitations of a large language model that's public, like ChatGPT, is that we don't get to control the weights. And because we don't get to control the weights of the input, of the sources of input, we inadvertently are victims to whatever kind of biases are inherent in the data. You need to make sure that those biases are not being reflected in the output of the LLM if you're using this for internal employees. And one of the ways you do that is by making sure you control the weights. So what you're going to do is you're going to get the generative AI from the large language model, essentially NLP, or the natural language processing, but all of the output and all of the tuning of the models and the weights needs to be controlled by this internal layer, or this wrapper around the output. That's a little bit abstract and a little bit high level, but the thing to think about is, yes, you can upload your data safely to a large language model, but you're not sharing it with the public version of, let's say, ChatGPT. Instead, it's going to stay within this kind of containerized architecture that will be specific to your environment. And whether it's Jeff or Joe or anyone else who's interested in more content or more information about how that architecture gets deployed for internal purposes, for internal use of generative AI. This is also a much longer conversation, but at least Seth and I wanted to tee up some of the ways you should be thinking about it before doing anything that that may cause harm to employees.
That's great. And we had a comment from Daryl saying the environment impact should be on the chart that you had in terms of all of those issues, which I think is very important. And he said, and then he posed the rhetorical question: who's going to be doing the work of organizing the subject matter and the training for this soon to be exploding field of content governance? And that's the critical issue here, is that this is no free lunch, right? There's no free lunch here. This does not obviate the need to manage that content, to structure that content, to organize that content, to tag that content. It is even more important now than it ever has been. So that's the answer to that. If people say, oh, we're just going to use ChatGPT, well, assuming you have the content and assuming you have the knowledge bases. Ryan, you asked about the wrapper concept. We're going to get into a little bit more of that, but we might not go into as much technical detail. I know you like a lot of technical detail, Ryan Sullivan. So, but we might have to take that offline. But we'll talk more about that. But I think those are great observations, and again, it calls out the need for us to do this in a way that is very methodical, right? Because it creates new original content. It's trained to learn patterns and relationships, and that allows it, that's knowledge as well, right? So it comes with embedded knowledge in the language model. That learned knowledge allows the generation of new content, because you're actually looking at the intent, you're looking at the question, and then you're matching that with what is probabilistically most appropriate in terms of response. But it's not a copy of the training data. And this is something this means that the knowledge of the organization has to be referenced by the technology. Full stop. I mean, this is the critical thing. I'm going to sound a little bit more, I'm going to sound like I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but this is the lesson that we want to take away. We have another poll here that I'd like to get into. What is the policy of your organization using ChatGPT? Is it banned because some organizations are banning it because of the IP issues and also copyright issues? Is it allowed with some restrictions? Is it not, free for all, or something else? So go ahead and let us do that. But it looks like only a couple of folks are banning ChatGPT, and many have no restrictions at all. It's important to understand the risks, right? If there are no restrictions at all, we need to understand those risks, and we need to make sure that employees know about the risks of uploading IP, right? Because you have to be very careful about that. Are there tools? There's another question here, and we'll let that popcorn pop a little bit more, but it looks like most companies are allowing it to some degree, or fully allowing it. So let me go ahead and share that.
Gladys, to your question, it's a good question. You can contact me offline, and we'll schedule a conversation about how you can upload large documents.
Yes, there are tools to upload documents.
You're not restricted by the size that.
No, that's right.
Not ChatGPT restricts.
That's right. And again, there's a bunch of different ways to do that, because you're going to want to point to knowledge sources, and then you're going to want to chunk those knowledge sources. So there's different ways to approach this, but you're right. You have a large product manual. You need to be able to understand. Yes, it's loading. It can be consuming, but there are programmatic approaches to being able to do this. So you can we're actually doing this for one of our clients with a knowledge management initiative. And part of what has to happen is these PDFs are fed into the system and they have to be programmatically split into components that are semantically meaningful. In other words, they contain a concept or an answer to a question. So this is all very, very important. Oh, I'm sorry, chat is disabled. You know what? I don't know how to, I think you can ask your question or maybe make your comment here, Bob, because I'm not sure if I can change the setting on chat. But go ahead and make your comment in the questions, Bob. I appreciate that. I think that's it for questions at the moment. Let me stop sharing and let me continue on here. And so this idea, it looks like my animation got broken, but this is the idea of being able to process the user query with the large language model to understand that intent, right? And now we can either generate the response based on the generalized language, or we can retrieve that response based on querying of the organizational content. And what happens is, this is where we have our proprietary content. We process the response using the large language model so that it is conversational. So you're using it at the front end, you're using it at the back end. You're using it to understand the query, and you're using it to understand the intent of what that person wants, and then you're processing your own content. So the large language model generically will use publicly available information, but when you use a knowledge base or content source, you're not compromising your IP. You're not exposing that IP, even though you're using the language model to process that answer, right? That's the critical thing here. So we're processing the query and we're presenting the results, but we are segmenting this. We are keeping this in a sandbox or in a container that the organization has responsibility over, not uploading it to the large language model. So, but you're at the same time conditioning that response so that it is conversational. So this is kind of the perfect world around doing this. Did you want to add anything to this, Dan?
No, I think there are a lot of good questions, and there's a conversation that we'll want to continue offline with some of the attendees who are most interested, but I think let's move on.
So Bob, your comment is the company's position, ChatGPT is nowhere on the radar, and it is potentially very disruptive. Scrambling to understand it, no restrictions, but that could change to a ban if they until they understand things more. So I think that's probably what's happening, Bob, is that yes, it wasn't on the radar, now it's on the radar, and now it's very important and people are scrambling. But the idea is to help the organization understand what those risks and limitations are and be able to appropriately deal with them with the right restrictions and the right training. Dan, I'll let you take this to talk a little bit about this.
And Bob, I think you just spoke on behalf of the 60% of the attendees on the webcast who said they're in the initial scoping phase. Good comment. So we said we wanted to make this actionable. So here are 8 use cases where you can use generative AI today in a way that's safe and secure and improve the employee experience. So talent management. So think about recommending personalized learning journeys that help in that reskilling and upskilling process. Think about the onboarding process. We shouldn't wait for new employees to submit tickets to the help desk. That's Byzantine, right? We can do better. We can anticipate their needs. We can create a concierge-like guided experience with AI. IT and HR service. Intelligence should be ambient in the enterprise. The answers should come to you. You shouldn't need to seek them out once something breaks. Process automation. Think about the ways to introspect your data and figure out how to improve productivity by improving your processes. Training and development. Think about ways to use AI to figure out where there are gaps in your content. You can then go and fill them. Resource planning. Who do we need to hire? When do we need to hire them? What should we pay them? Where should we recruit them from? All of these kinds of questions are really well aided by AI. Content reviews, certainly a good use of generative AI. So generative AI is not good at authoring content that is standalone, but it's great at making suggestions. It's great at being what Microsoft and GitHub call a co-pilot. And then lastly, of course, offboarding. So think about how to automate all of the routine tasks to be able to reduce the friction associated with offboarding. So across the life cycle of the employee in your organization, think about every opportunity where an employee has some need for some kind of internal team to be an opportunity to use your data to deliver an exceptional experience. That's the way to think about where generative AI can impact the enterprise.
Yeah, and I think the training and development, being able to build, to assess where people are, what their hard and soft skill gaps are, and then being able to prescribe a very specific custom e-learning program or training program for them, that allows you to meet people where they are, right? And there's a lot of different mechanisms for assessing those skill gaps, and then we can personalize the training based on those skill gaps. And a lot of that can be done. We've built personalization architectures for custom e-learning for a number of organizations. So I want to talk about generalized versus specialized language models. So the idea here is, again, the language model is a general language model that understands the world, that understands concepts, but there are more than one language model. There's not just one language model to rule them all. There are multiple language models with nuances and differences and specializations. Then we have industry specific. There's life sciences has tons of language models, financial services, legal. There's language models for travel. There are language models for climate. There's language models for all these different subfields that are specialized to understand that terminology. Now, even those industry specific language models can be too big and bulky, right? We're dealing with this with one organization in life sciences where the language model just has too many terms. It's not specialized enough for that enterprise. It contains terms that are not relevant, and we're actually working to trim that language model down and specialize in ontology that is specific to the organization. And this is where we get into the enterprise specific language models, the lexicons, the ontologies, the taxonomies. And again, when we have an ontology, just describes a domain of knowledge, and it's all the taxonomies that describe the different elements, like, you know, products and services and solutions and content types and employees and regions and customer types. Those are all vocabularies. And then we have relationships between them. Here are the services for this product. Here are the solutions to this problem. And here are the interests for these roles, right? And all of those relationships become that scaffolding for the organization, that scaffolding for knowledge. And that is what's critically important in adapting these language models and adapting all of this to reconcile your particular content. Anything to add, Dan?
A little bit of context. So we hear OpenAI talk about their vision being achieving AGI, artificial general intelligence, kind of the bottom of the pyramid. We are many decades away from that. And me on a soapbox, I don't think that should be a goal. We don't want to trick people into thinking that AI can replicate any human task. What is very much on the horizon is artificial narrow intelligence, or ANI, and that's kind of the top two sections of the pyramid, where for specific tasks, you'll find that AI is going to be exceptionally well trained to be able to augment the capabilities of humans. The other thing to think about is that a lot of the impediments that exist right now, Daryl mentioned the environmental impact. Today, we don't have the compute that we need. We don't have a handle on how to adequately train these models. We don't have an adequate handle on some of the ethics. Regulation is not in place. That's going to change very rapidly. The innovation that you're going to see here in, let's say, even the next 18 months, it's more going to be around putting the right guardrails in place so that we can use these techniques and these technologies to benefit society more broadly. But you're going to see kind of the pace of acceleration will slow in terms of the AI and a lot of the use of these big transformer models, but you're going to see it rapidly accelerate, so that I'd say, Seth, when we're on a version of this webcast within 2-3 years, we will all have ChatGPT running locally on our iPhone. I think that sort of thing is going to happen very quickly. So I want you all to think about what, how the cultural landscape is going to change when we can do some of these things that we do today with ChatGPT, only at scale in a way that it's safe and there are the appropriate guardrails.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's going to be highly specialized, and then you're going to have multiple bots and agents and virtual assistants that will have highly specialized areas. And then you'll have concierge bots that will know where to go for certain things. Joe has a question about deployment and implementation in a typical company, timeline, primary steps of the process. That will vary because it really depends on the use case and it depends on the knowledge sources. And I'm going to show you something where, we have a quick KM readiness assessment for a generative AI offering. And we'll talk about that in a little while, but we can do that in a very short sprint to understand what your organization is and put a plan together for doing a proof of concept. And then that becomes a shampoo, rinse, repeat as you onboard the knowledge sources, as you get your knowledge house in order, as you componentize that knowledge. That is what's going to be really important. So when you start, so this is another following question. Once uploaded into a repository, how is it learn to effectively synthesize proprietary information and have an iterative conversation with the user? The iterative conversation is a little more difficult because that you're going to need more of the language model. This is more retrieval. So there's a good question in there, Joe, about how are you doing this? But again, what the mechanics of this are that the answer is passed through the large language model running in an instance that is not public, and that will format and structure the response in a conversational way. It may have more, there may be more difficulty with multi-turn conversations, but in this case, what we're trying to do is build question answering systems and be able to do this. But the multi-turn conversations are a little bit more advanced, but they're also very doable. Let me continue on here.
So follow up with Seth and I after this, and we'll show you a demo. And I think it'll answer your question about how to combine the LLM with, like Seth alluded to, multi-turn conversation, but while making sure that it's retrieving content from your data sources.
Yep. So here's the problem that we have. When in most organizations, we find that knowledge is very fragmented. We have different departments, and the departments within them have various processes that they are supporting. So sales or marketing or engineering are going to have lots of different things. But then within those processes, there are more processes, right? There are more subtasks. There are more areas of specialization. So today, knowledge is very fragmented. And this is what we're going to see. What we do see now is that people start bolting on content operations for AI, meaning we're just going to build some content for this specific chatbot. That is not going to be sustainable because this is what's going to happen, right? We're going to start seeing all of these things being bolted on. But again, it is what has to happen. We need to retain the context of the knowledge sources, but at the same time, we need to be able to have centralized standards and centralized processes, content models, taxonomies, control vocabularies, metadata structures, and ontologies, and so on, and governance and metrics-driven processes. We set this up for a company 7-8 years ago who is handling 2 million knowledge transactions per day, and they're saving hundreds of millions of dollars based on that. But this took literally, 5, 7, 6, 7 years to fully deploy, but they are 10 years ahead of the marketplace. So, but this is called create once, publish everywhere. This is really how we need to think about this. We're still creating content in the departments and the functional areas that have the expertise, but where we're using our standard structures, standard processes, and mechanisms, because otherwise it's the Wild West, right? Different departments use different organizing principles and mechanisms, and many don't have good content hygiene. But the whole idea is that we need to have this content hygiene. The last poll I want to jump into is, where are you? Is your organization using LLMs to access knowledge? Is this something that you're doing? So not being considered under consideration in production. I'm really impressed by those people who are in production. That's fantastic. So you're already doing this. You're already, because it is not that mysterious. I'd love to hear what your challenges are with that, because my guess is the challenges are going to be in the knowledge and the content rather than the technology that is weaving this together. But I'm gonna go through this. I'm gonna end this poll pretty quickly here, because I think those themes are really important, in the fact that people are not there yet. In many cases, you're going to have to be there, because this is the nature of the beast. I'm going to stop. Okay, sharing this, and let's go ahead and keep going. Oops, I may not have shared the results, but anyway, it was most people are under consideration, a fewer in production, and many have not considered this yet. But again, it does need to be part of your future. So when you start thinking about this, the quality is dependent upon the quality of the knowledge, and the knowledge hygiene has to be improved by understanding the nature of requests, employee requests, customer requests, really being able to understand what the nature is, what problems they're trying to solve, and the resolution details, how they're being solved, because we need to look for repeat issues and we need to look for unambiguous steps to resolution. And there's a lot of different metrics that can be applied here. And again, these are for situations where you really need to make sure that you're justifying that investment, getting the right return on that investment. And we also can do this for generalized knowledge processes, right? Where we're not necessarily looking exactly at repeatable processes, but we're using it to access and make more conversational the interaction with our data sources. Dan, did you want to add to this?
Nothing to add.
Okay. So let's see. So what's happening? So this is interesting. What some organizations are doing is they're using it for their engineers to check code, but we have to be careful about that, because if we upload code and it's proprietary, it's going to go into the public domain. So be careful about that. But that's where it's being produced, is to say the code will then go into production, but it's being tested or checked. Here's an AI readiness assessment. It's the knowledge management piece. It's a sprint to identify the issues, the challenges, what would hinder your adoption of generative AI using your knowledge. And again, it's identifying the sources of knowledge, reviewing those knowledge intensive processes, looking at the knowledge quality score, evaluating the state of readiness for this, and then making sure that you have, a readout that shows you when you can create a POC, how you can create a POC, and how you can leverage large language models. So anyway, that's that piece. And then Dan, do you want to just talk about this executive summary for your?
Yeah, I mentioned we spent about 3 months surveying employees around the world. Over 1,300 responded. And just for attending today's webcast, we're offering the executive summary for free. I'd encourage you. There's the link. Download it. We also have versions of this. Seth and I packed a lot of content into a very short conversation, but join us. Continue the journey with us. There's a lot of upcoming conversations and case studies and things that answer a lot of the questions that you may have at the end of this session.
This is an exciting time. I just noticed that someone was saying they were using it to review copy after generation, but you have to have that tight data governance and those policies. But again, thank you. We've been answering questions as we've gone. Please have a conversation with us. Let us know your thoughts. Reach out, let's have a conversation and help you move things forward. Here's some additional reading and listening, podcasts, as well as articles. And I have a new article coming out in Customer Think magazine, which is a website that has some great content. And then, of course, we have podcasts, which is the Early AI podcast that you should check out wherever you get podcasts. Don't forget EARLEY, don't forget the E before the Y. And then, of course, People Rain have their webinars and their podcasts. So please be sure to register for those as well. And with that, yes, we will be sending the presentation out for people. Whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to close that screen. I'll keep it up, but yes, we will be sharing this. There's my contact information. You can feel free to reach out to me. But thank you for your time today. We're going to give you 10 minutes back to your day. Dan, thank you for your time, and thanks everyone for listening, and please reach out and let's continue the conversation.
Great questions. Thanks for making this interactive, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.